Proper Davidic monarch, at the very least, will be a figurehead. Have we had figureheads, by the way? Figurehead Jewish monarchs in classical times, biblical times? Is there such a thing? The answer is yes. The first figurehead is Saul's own son. Avner says, put Saul's surviving son on the throne, and doesn't say that he made any decisions. Avner was basically calling all the shots. So, it's just, yeah, you be king, I'll run the show. And that's what Yoav tried to do to David HaMelech, by the way. But David HaMelech was sort of resisting. Basically, Avner was to Ishbosheth as Yoav was to David HaMelech. He was a little bit rebellious himself, but David HaMelech realized, I can't take this guy out because I'm not strong enough politically to do it. And that's one of the underlying themes of the book of Samuel. And ultimately, the book of Kings, what does David HaMelech say about, Yoav, who's basically getting away with murder, literal murder. He's been getting away with murder.
I'm curious how you're reading, because I'm currently reading.
Okay, so very simply, at the end he tells Shlomo, you got to take out Yoav somehow because he's a killer, and he's done things wrong. And David HaMelech basically says at the Shefa ben Bichri incident, I can't do anything about these B'nai Tzeruya. Just have to figure out a way, and he never figured out a way in his own lifetime. And also, let's say King Yehoash, son of Achaziah. Achaziah died, and then his murderous wife decided to just kill the family. Ahab's family's gone. All her father's house is gone. Izebel's been defenestrated, and basically, that means thrown out the window. And her brother, the king of Israel, has been killed, and the entire family, the extended family of Ahab, has been wiped out. So she's the only one left, and she's sitting pretty in Yerushalayim. Her own son is dead, so she might as well take out everybody related to her deceased husband, and then she could reign. Wait a minute. If she kills her own children, like it says she did, who did she expect to succeed her? And the answer is the evil people who want to seize power never think about successors. They don't work on building their successor. They always, that's the problem with these terrible dictator types. So it's so much about themselves. They just hope that if they have a son who they want to replace, who they want to see succeed, that one of their top guys won't assassinate the son somehow. That's always the case. Who was Stalin's children? Did Stalin's children succeed him?
No, they didn't.
Yeah, Hitler, Yamach Shemo. Anything happening there?
Well, he never had children.
The people who've been running Korea are relatively lucky that they're they had a successor, but that's because that place is really, really messed up. But normally, a person who rules like this, she wasn't thinking about the future; she was thinking about herself. This is Athaliah, Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab, surviving daughter. So her son was the sole survivor, saved by the high priest Yehoiada, and it says that Yehoiada put him on the throne basically at the age of 7. So you have a 7-year-old king. So it says, Mishamrim lo hamlucha, like the Rambam says. You preserve the right to be king for this child when he grows up. But in practice, he was just a figurehead. It says, Ben Sheva Shanim Yehoash B'Molcho. He was 7 years old when he took the throne. He reigned for so-and-so years. He wasn't in charge. He wasn't in bar mitzvah. What did he know? It says he just basically was a puppet of the real power, Yehoiada HaKohen, which was a good thing. So he was a figurehead. And that's fine. We could have a figurehead Davidic monarch if he's a young man. I would pray that we would have a person like King David, who was humble, a musician, and basically a very pious person, a Hasid, a warrior for the Jews who did justice for the Jewish people and was extremely committed to building the temple. That would be great if you have someone like that, just like a model of King David, a Hezekiah type. So if you think about this, King David led a revolution in his own days, which is analogous to our own days, his days and our days. What happened? When the people wanted Saul for the wrong reasons, they asked the prophet for a king, not in order to fulfill the Torah commandment. They already had Samuel, so that's technically a fulfillment. Like I said, there's always someone who's the leader of the Jewish people. So Samuel is a de facto organic leader of the Jewish people as the prophet, but they wanted to officialize it just like, sometimes you have to do this. So, but they asked for Saul for the wrong reasons. So that's analogous to the state of Israel's birth and institutions born in sin. The state of Israel, when it was founded, should have had a Sanhedrin and a Davidic king, all the institutions described by the sages. Instead, it had a Knesset and a Supreme Court, which are all modeled after the Western system, except slightly corrupted so that those who have the power can maintain the power longer. So Saul, like the prophet says, I gave them a king in my wrath and I'll take it away in my anger. They asked in the wrong way. They asked for the wrong reasons and they did it wrong. Now it was analogous to building the state's institutions in a way to copy the Gentiles instead of trying to do it in a Jewish way. But then Saul unified the peoples. How do you force it? He was the first one said, if you don't come to fight with me, you're going to be destroyed. You'll have to do this. And his initial military victories, the first one was against the Ammonites, and then against the Philistines, and then against the Amalekites. And it says in between the war with the Philistines and the Amalekites, Saul really gave it to all the surrounding nations. He picked fights with Ammon and Moab and Edom, and even a little bit of the Amalekites, and went north. It says all the ways he turns Yarshia. He was really messing with them and really taking it to Israel's end. It doesn't say he expanded the borders, but he let them know that they weren't going to pick on Israel any longer. So it says he had a good track record of military victories before David's anointment, and even after David's anointment, no one had a Havamina, including Samuel, that Saul should be rejected. Remember, God had to tell Samuel that Saul was rejected. Otherwise, Samuel would have said, resounding victory. And here's Agag. Thank you for saving him for a big public execution. This will be just like they hung Haman's 10 sons. That's what you're supposed to do. Most people, if it hadn't been for the prophet telling us that Saul made a mistake, no human being would have been able, or AI would have been able to discern that he had done such a thing, like we discussed before. So Saul's initial military victories against the people of Ammon, Plishtim, Amalek, and securing the borders is analogous to the state of Israel's initial victories leading up to the Six-Day War. The state of Israel had a good track record defending its borders and uniting its people. And up until even consider the Yom Kippur War, which was, they ended up on the wrong foot at the beginning. They were surprised and they really took it at the beginning, still a victory. So all that's analogous to Saul's early days. By the way, it also what?
It took about 12 days to turn around.
Yeah. And also, by the way, happened over the same course of time that Josephus gives to Saul. It says Saul was king for 2 years. It doesn't fit. Many Mefarshim point that out. Josephus actually says, I think Saul was king for 22 years.
Oh, wow.
Before David shows up on the scene.
Barbanos is 17?
17? Okay.
I think Barbanos.
Okay. 17, but a significant amount of time, a few decades to give David time. Remember, it doesn't seem to fit that David was even adult or alive maybe when Saul was anointed and became king. And I would estimate that David basically ran away from Saul. He became Saul's son-in-law at the age of 18. He didn't marry Michal before that. He was anointed before Bar Mitzvah. That's alluded to in the Psukim. David's anointment was basically at the age of 12. He wasn't old enough to go off to the army like his 3 older brothers. So he only had 3 older brothers who were of draftable age.
But later in chapter 16, he's described as a Gibor Chayil.
Yeah, so Gibor Chayil means that he has promise. Lama Davar Doma, military academy. The kid's not drafted yet. He's the youngest of 8 brothers, only 3 of whom have gotten to age where they could be drafted, which means he's in the younger 5. He's well below 20. It means like West Point. Who goes to West Point? At what age do they start recruiting guys for West Point? Anything about West Point, the military academy?
I'm not going to be able to answer.
Military school. So it goes like this. They find kids in high school. Already they're groomed to be military leaders. They find this. Or you have, I guess, like military academies. It used to be a Western tradition that kids are starting to train to be soldiers already as teenagers, even though they're not actually going to be drafted until they're come of age. But they're trained in these ways. So Saul's advisor, who they say was Doeg, even though he's not identified as such, identifies King the David, Jesse's son, as having a lot of promise. A very promising young man. By the way, and the recommendation was not to draft this guy. But what was the point? Why were they looking at his resume?
To be a musician. Yeah,
they needed to hire a court musician, someone who could play the harp nice and sing. Guy with a kid with a good voice. I would think even perhaps maybe his voice hadn't even changed so that he could still sing the way he was singing as a kid. That's why the way I understand is David was anointed basically at the age of 12. He did not come to the sacrifice with Jesse and Jesse's brothers. Why? It says the Navi was supposed to, his cover was coming to do a korban at the Bama in Beis Lechem. Yishai is a prominent person, and bring his sons also. This is a religious ritual. So all the sons who were above Bar Mitzvah were included. Where's David, the Katan? Well, he's not here. Why? It's like when I buy seats in shul for Yom Kippur,
Right.
do I pay for the kids who are 12 and 11? Do I get them a seat in shul like the rest? Yes. If you have a kid who's really, you really, but already you don't invite the non-bar mitzvah kids. I
Well,
said, what?
that's a much better point.
Yeah.
Rather than the three oldest who were drafted and nobody else was.
Yeah.
Because only 1/20th of Saul's army was from Judah.
Okay. So they didn't need so many Judahites.
Yeah.
My point was that there was still, it doesn't seem that David was ready to be drafted. By the time the whole Goliath incident happened, I think that's about 4 years later when he was about 16. So that he's young enough, he's still not drafted, but old enough to start to want to be interested in this. I think Lahavdil Elif Alfi Avdallah's the character in that Mel Gibson movie with the Revolutionary War. They had a thing. It's sort of ironic. He plays a fictional American patriot who fights in the Revolutionary War,
Right.
and the oldest son wants to also fight and goes off to war. He's just come of age, but there's a teenager who must be like 15 or 16 who wants to be like his brother, but obviously he's too young to go. And he's the one who picks a fight with British officers, whatever, thinks he's going to be a hero and gets himself shot. And that is what provokes the whole falling action leading to the climax, etc. So the point is that David, at the age when he smote Goliath, was still too young to be considered a soldier, but old enough to be excited about this and interested. Like his brother criticizes him, like, "Oh, you're just thinking this is romantic and fun to see the war and battle and all that." That's obviously wasn't what David's intention was. He was more zealous for the Chil Hashem that was happening. My point is that David's age, Josephus, I think, gives 22 years or so, 20 years or so for the beginning of this whole story. And David basically ran away and became a fugitive shortly after his marriage, before he had kids with Michal even. So he became Saul's son-in-law. And that was just, by the way, a pretext to try to get David killed. Right? Just capture 20 Philistine foreskins so that, and Saul really hoped, and he'll fail and get himself killed, and I'll be rid of him. But the problem is, David succeeded. So then he got the princess's hand. And it was shortly thereafter he had to run away. So David and Michal were not together long enough as a couple for them to have children. And that was basically at what age did they marry men off back in the day? At what age? 18 or so. 18 was like when it started. By 20, they were married. So David basically was a fugitive for 10 years. Saul died when David was 30, and that's when David became king in Hebron. Shortly thereafter, he became king of all Israel at the age of 37. And that's explicit in the verse. So I would put the whole chronology as around the age of 12, he was anointed. About 16 or so, that's when he smote Goliath. The next few years, he was working for Saul until about the age of 18, when he was of marriageable age. That's when Saul became extremely jealous of him and tried all sorts of pretexts to kill him, and then just outright tried to kill him. And that's when David ran away. And for the next 10 years or so, David was a fugitive. So my point is that these initial victories of Saul, the first 20 years or so, were analogous to the state of Israel's ability to thoroughly wipe out his enemies and win those first 2 decades or so, 25 years of Israeli history. And then Saul, when he went nuts afterwards, and basically it says Ruach Ra'ah, he's possessed by a bad spirit. Okay, he's no longer divine inspired. Remember, if you go from being inspired by God, having a Ruach Hashem and Ruach Elohim that's stirring within you, and it's just removed, it gets replaced by, like the Navi says, it was replaced by a spirit of melancholy that basically made him depressed and crazy. So he turned on those closest to him. First, his Rebbe, he turns on Shmuel. He doesn't want to see him again. Shmuel doesn't want to see him again. Then his children, Jonathan and Michal, he turns on them. He says, like, you're traitors to me. And then he turns on his own son-in-law. He tries to kill his son-in-law. What kind of man does that? Okay. And then he turned on his people. It was better to fight battles that he wasn't going to win, or waste his army, marshal the army to chase after David instead of national defense. And then eventually he lost. And that nearly undid all his accomplishments. Because why? Why was Saul basically doing this to David? Why didn't he just give up? Abdicate. If not in favor of David, who he realized was supposed to be succeeded, but at least in favor of his son. Just give up the job. Why didn't he abdicate? I said that already. So the answer is He wanted to focus and stay in the power. It was the power. He needed to stay king. So too, the current Israeli regime no longer wants to focus on, let's say, settling land of Israel and winning wars. It's lost its way, and it just wants to hold on to power. And in the face of what? The advent of a new, truly Jewish movement that wants to lead the Jewish people. Democratically speaking, we should be having new institutions and changing things around. We're not allowed to. The institutions are holding on too much. You can't have a democratic revolution here in the land of Israel. That's basically what it is. So what led to King David's kingdom is basically analogous to what's happening to us.